clamps.
I'm coming, by the way.
To
God
where?
Damn. That's so much damage. I deny you.
I need to be denied.
Deny click.
Well, I think you hit the ground, you dumb bitch. Why are you talking? Because you weren't using dumb bitch. God, can't even rely on you to do one thing right.
Watch the fucking replay. I definitely clicked through that.
I will watch replay. I'll watch your misclick, dumbass.
Wow, that was really mean. This right here, people, is toxic behavior in video games. It seems like whenever you're on an online game and you mess up, well, you have to deal with this.
Deny click.
Well, I think you hit the ground, you dumb bitch. Why are you talking? Because you weren't using dumb bitch.
This type of behavior is pretty common in video games. So common that we call it toxic behavior. And this really messes with a lot of gamers and developers, because a lot of gamers leave the game because they don't want to deal with this type of behavior, and developers lose money. So I decided for my inquiry project that I research about how does developers deal with toxic behavior. And throughout all my research, I found a lot of really interesting things. But most of my research point to this man, Dr. Jeffrey Lynn.
So we used to believe that toxic behavior and online games simply go hand in hand. In fact, when the player behavior team first started, many players, many devs came to us and said, this is an impossible problem. You guys simply have to deal with it. Just ban the players and move on.
Which those developers are right to say about toxic behavior. I mean, the toxic behavior is so bad, it even affects them so badly that they can't talk about their games without people disrespecting and sending death threats to them if they say something wrong about it. But it seems like Dr. Lynn thinks something differently.
I'm going to show you a behavioral profile for a known toxic player in the game. So on the x-axis, you have games over time, and on the y-axis, you have severity of toxic offense. As you can see here, each bar represents a particular game where this player had a known toxic offense. The height of each bar represents the severity of that offense. And a known toxic player has a lot of these. And 98% of our players have this kind of behavioral profile. What you notice really quickly is that they do have their toxic behaviors. But it's not too severe, it's not too frequent. And this makes sense. All of us have our bad days.
My point is, I went crazy.
Joking aside, Dr. Jeffrey Lynn came up with some good points, and he came up with this really good idea that can combat against this.
Like, are you Yes.
The second experiment I'll talk about today is the tribunal experiment. Again, we started with the hypothesis. We wanted to engage our own community to manage their own behaviors. And maybe this could be an effective approach to fighting toxic behavior. This was inspired by the second core pillar on the player behavior team, to reform or remove toxic players. Here's an example tribunal case. I mentioned earlier that League of Legends players can report each other on a variety of negative dimensions as well as positive dimensions. What the tribunal does is it bubbles the worst offenders to the top and then builds tribunal cases for them. So you can see chat logs, you can see item builds. If I could scroll down, you can also see team compositions. We then present these cases back to our community where they can now vote on these behaviors and tell us, is this behavior okay or not okay in League of Legends? Players can be punished by this system. To give you a sense of the magnitude of this experiment, in the past year alone, in North America and Europe, we recorded over 105 million votes. We reformed over 280,000 players. And by reform, we mean players that at one point have been punished by our systems and are currently in positive standing. But a common question that we get is, how accurate is this system? I'm going to highlight a few examples for you. So here's an example where our community voted to punish the player, and the end result was an email warning. You can see there's some amount of profanity in there. There's an offensive mom joke. Here's an example where the community voted to punish the player, but the end result was a longer time ban. You can see there's harsher language, and there's death threats in there. And here's an example where community voted to pardon the player and there was no punishment. You can clearly see this player was reported for trash talking, but he didn't say anything in the game. What we also did was measure accuracy of both our players against our in-house support staff. What we found was a high level agreement, up to 80%. But the interesting part is that most of that deviation came from our riders being more strict than the players. So the system is pretty accurate, but we haven't had a perfect history.
And Dr. Jeffrey is right. Not everything is perfect, and we still need to work on this problem. But I hope in the future, more people are working on this, more companies are working hard at this and researching this type of issue so we can make games safer and better for everyone to play, that no one has to deal with harassment or be mistreated just for messing up. And I hope in the future I can become a developer to stop this.
One time I wasted 125 mana on a camp and you went to 6 to recruit.
Yeah, you can say ass.
Yeah, it's like when I wasted 125 men on the defending scale in a camp, and then you rinse that game. What we learned, you rinse it.
You see what I have to deal with?